So, guys, I'm delighted tonight to be joined by a research fellow at the Aberdeen Centre for Arthritis and Musculoskeletal Health at the University of Aberdeen. Martin Stephen joins us. I hope you're well, Martin.
Yes, I am. Hello. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for joining us and on your Sunday. I really do appreciate it. And also thanks for reaching over, getting in touch to talk about the vitally important work that you do that we'll be touching upon tonight, because we share a lot of lived experiences here, but I think it's also really important that we get all seats sort of around the table on these topics to discuss these points. So for anyone that's sort of like not familiar with your work, and before we get in deep into sort of the research side of things, do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about who you are and your career and how you sort of arrived to be here tonight, I suppose?
Sure. Yeah. No, that's a really good opportunity. Thank you. Well, first and foremost, I can say I can directly relate to feeling behind on everything. I think that's, especially when you're talking about articles and presentations. Yeah.
I'm proud in a minute.
But yeah, so I'm a research fellow at the University of Aberdeen. Now, that's actually quite strange because I live on the south coast of England. So I work for the University of Aberdeen remotely. So I don't think there's a further university away from me in the British Isles. Maybe there is. We'll find out if we Google Maps it. But
always welcome to have people here championing the benefits of remote work, and so yeah, that's good.
Definitely, yeah. So I've had a varied career to lead to research. I wasn't straight out of university research. I was straight out of university into retail, actually. I was a retailer for an awfully long time. Then I joined the civil service for 10 plus years. And after that, I joined research. So I started relatively late for a researcher, aged about 36, I think I was. But as to sort of why research, you'll forgive me a wry smile there. When I was a civil servant, I wasn't enjoying my job at all. I just didn't enjoy it towards the end. And I thought, there's not really much else I can do. So I started applying for a lot of jobs. And I was living in Southampton at the time. And I applied to the University of Southampton as it was an administration job. And I got an interview and I thought, let's look up what this department was and what they do. And it turns out they were a science department and an epidemiology one at that. So I had to really start at basics. What is epidemiology? That's what I went into the interview armed with. And they asked me the same question. Why research? Why now? And I thought to myself, and I was like, why? And I can tell you why, and it's the same answer I gave back then, is that when I was a civil servant, I really felt like what I was doing wasn't worthwhile. It was at the beginning. When I first was a civil servant, I felt we were doing a lot of good. Towards the end, less so. And I really wondered why I was coming in the morning, though. Why am I spending 50 hours a week, regardless of the money, regardless of everything else? Why am I actually doing it, getting out of bed? It didn't feel satisfying. And I said, research, okay, I can get behind that. I hope that I'll always feel like I'm getting out of bed for a reason. I'll always feel like I'm working towards something a bit greater than myself and it's kind of helping other people. It sounds like a cliche, but really that's why I do it. And I think that's why a lot of researchers do what they do as well, because actually genuinely it can make a difference. It doesn't always, but that's what we're trying to do. And I think that's quite a good motivator for me personally. That's why research.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. So the point you made there, because a lot of people sort of had that sort of epiphany sort of like after the pandemic, didn't they? Or, I'd had that sort of moment when I become a dad. It was like, why, if I'm spending all this time away from home, it needs to be for the right reasons. And I think that's great. And was there anyone you'd interfaced with that was in research, or were you inspired by anyone that was doing research, or was it just
it was being very unhappy in the current role and then trying to apply elsewhere? But I will say my first supervisor, Professor Karen Walker-Bone, was absolutely superb, because I really didn't know a lot. So she coached me through pretty much all of it, from what to wear, what to say, and you kind of a professor with a pretty busy sort of schedule. No, Martin, wear a shirt but not a tie. It was really down to that level. So, yeah, kudos to her for doing that, because 8 years later I'm still a researcher, so I do owe her quite a lot there.
That's brilliant. I love when people give shout outs to those because people don't realise how important those sort of first contacts and
Exactly.
those things are. That is the deciding point, isn't it?
I
Which way
don't
you go
know.
in that fork.
And I think in many ways, I still don't know how universities really work. I'm still surprised by a lot of it because I haven't been there my entire career. So to me, every day is a learning day, like you said earlier, and it's still interesting. And I think as well, I have the sort of ability to go, oh, that's a bit strange, if something is a bit strange, rather than just sit there and say, oh no, it's completely normal.
And I suppose for anyone that, like, I interface now with more researchers than ever through like the work I do, or I'll meet at a conference or cross paths, but it can still sometimes even to me feel like a little bit of a black hole about what what it is you do. Like, we will talk about the studies in detail shortly, but is there maybe like a general overview you can give people for anyone that isn't like aware of what that role entails?
So yeah, if in research, I guess what we basically do is, I mean, I'm an epidemiologist, so we look into sort of disease prevalence, sort of what's leading up to a disease and the disease spread. That's basic epidemiology. Then we kind of exploded that out to include a bit more social stuff, so qualitative and mixed methods work. So we actually talk to people rather than just look at numbers and data now. And that's sort of like we look at say, I mean, the quick study is about chronic pain at work, or the iPREPARE study is about the role of patient research partners in rheumatology research. I guess it's just trying to kind of push forward why people have medical conditions and how those medical conditions affect their lives. You know, it's a bit wider than, say, the simple pharma type research that does this drug help with X. Well, yes, that's really important, but also it's sort of like, well, actually, how does this condition affect you, and how can we make that better? At the end of the day, the question is always, how is this going to change something? How is this going to make something better? And as long as you've got that question in mind, I think almost any research is worthwhile.
Yeah, and I think that's thank you for that brilliant explanation, and I think it's that difference is worth noting, isn't it, between like industry and academia sort of thing, because I've seen both sides. I'm fortunate enough to have sort of gone for a tour around pharma research, and they could be like quite cold and very scientific, and then what we're going to be talking about tonight is like very much sort of people based and helping the individual at the end of that line and everything. So I think that's a really important sort of difference to point out, and I will echo what somebody said in the comments about researchers just seem to be genuinely nice people, because I've had exactly the same experience where everyone I've come across, they just seem to be in it for the right reasons and want to help people, and I think that's pretty special. So I wanted to ask you, we're going to talk a lot tonight about patient and public involvement in research, and particularly around one of those studies. So I thought before we get to that point, it'd probably be worth us setting out, what is patient and public involvement in research, and why is that important? I know that's a pretty big, broad question, but feel free to answer that in as much detail as you like.
Well, I guess getting the public involved in research is vitally important, so we can contextualize research. For a start, there's sort of democratic principle. If research is about you, if it's about your medical condition, you should have a say in how that is conducted. And crucially, of course, say you're researching a medical condition, people with that medical condition will know more about it than you. They're the experts in that condition. So their experiences should be the things that you're researching. It should contribute to your research. It should it should determine what your research is about in the first place. What's important? What should I research that will help you? And as I said earlier, having that question in mind at the beginning, who's going to benefit from this? How can this change something? That, I think, is really important to get people's views on, especially if they have that medical condition, because they will be the ones ultimately who can determine, say, what research to do, how to take that research forward. They can help you interpret data. Often, when I find I'm working with patient research partners, they're often just as good as research as me. I feel sort of like inexperienced, both in terms of the condition and as well, they're also very, very good researchers. Sometimes we get people who are sort of new to it, but often they're very, very good researchers too. So I guess, why is it important? It just makes our research better in every single way, every single conceivable way. that you can think of. Our research is better for the involvement of patient partners. And it's something that the University of Aberdeen epidemiology group is actually quite good at. We have our own PPI, that's patient and public involvement. We have our own dedicated group, so we have a core group doing that. We have quite a big mailing list of people who are ready to contribute to studies. And whenever we have, say, an idea for a new study, we can run that past our PPI group and get feedback very, very quickly because everyone's so engaged. We have a couple of very, very good committee members who are very engaged and will send out any work that we want views on, and that will come back very, very quickly because people really do care, and that they help us determine both what to research and how to go about that.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why people like myself have such good experiences with people in your profession, because you're kind of preaching to the choir. You know, as an advocate, sometimes you're trying to get across that lived experience matters and patient involvement matters, but with research, because it's just obvious that it helps what you're trying to do. It gives you better data, better results. You're kind of preaching to the choir, aren't you? So, yeah, I think we've got a little bit of work, I think, to then broaden that and try and get others in the community on board. But yeah, I think that's probably why we always, just make an assumption there is why we probably have such great experiences with the research community. And like I say, people like yourself so willing to come onto sort of a very patient focused show and share your experiences. So I really appreciate that tonight.
I think as well, I mean, that's changed I've been doing research 8 years. That's changed quite dramatically in just the 8 years I've been working in research. When I first started out, there wasn't as much, certainly, sort of PPI work, and now it's become mainstream, and that's great. And I mean, to apply for a grant now, most of the time, I think nearly all of them, you'll need to demonstrate that you've had patient and public involvement. And that feels like a box ticking, potentially. It could be. But actually, I think, that requirement from funders is actually quite important because it does make sure that that's happened. So, yeah, it can be viewed as a box ticking. Oh, I can only get this grant if I have PPI involvement. Let's tick that box. But I've not really experienced it like that. It seems very genuine whenever I've been involved with PPI work.
Yeah, and especially like the research side, somebody on the other side of that, focus group stuff from like, say, industry can very much feel like that. You'll be brought in, you realise the project is already maybe 75, 80% the way through. And like the first question I'm normally awkwardly having to ask is, well, who decided this was the need? Or, this is what was, whereas my experience with research is very much that's a consideration from the start. It's an ongoing thing, isn't it? Where I don't know if that's your experience working on the other side. It kind of be more start to finish rather than just bringing people at the end to validate. Well,
that's an interesting part of the iPREPARE study, which we'll discuss later. That's the experiences of patient research partners in rheumatology research, to be specific. But if you're talking about the sort of bad experiences, yeah, that would be sort of the project was already determined before I got there. I couldn't really contribute. My contributions didn't make a big difference. And one of the questions we asked in our questionnaire was, how early did you get involved? How early did that study involve you? What was it at the design stage, which it should be? It should be all the sort of research cycle, we call it, throughout. You should have PPI involvement. Were you involved at the design stage, or were you involved later on? So I'm not going to say that doesn't happen, that people get involved as box ticking exercises later on, but certainly that's not been my experience, thank goodness.
Yeah, and that bit there about that study just means I'm just now going to race forward and we can talk about the iPREPARE study, because I'm intrigued straight away my ears pricked up when you said that question was there, because I'm thinking, yes, that's what we've been asking for years. So tell us about, right from the top, tell us about we'll start with iPREPARE study. Tell us about what that's aiming to achieve and what that involves.
Well, I guess iPREPARE, that's the implementing patient research partner engagement in research study. So we do like a good acronym in science, and we were
I'm glad you said that all out rather than me.
We were over the moon when we came up with that, but I think it's a bit cumbersome actually in hindsight. So what it's basically looking at is the role of patient research partners in rheumatology research. And what we mean by that is we're sort of looking at how patient research partners themselves, when they're involved in research, how do they perceive their role? Is it of value? Is it of value to them? Do they think they're being taken seriously? Are they on an equal footing with the researchers? Then it's asking the researchers as well the same kind of question, saying, do you think the patient research partners are making a good contribution? Are you on an equal footing with them? And it's asking them and then contrasting those two results together. That's what we're hoping to do, to see if there's any differences between the two.
Right.
But with the iPREPARE study, I think it's probably easier to sort of go through a personal journey on that, how I got involved in that. I read a paper by one of the professors at the University of Aberdeen called Sean Treweek, and I think it's called Getting It Wrong Most of the Time. And what that said was they'd sent out sort of the primary objectives of a certain amount of randomized controlled trials. That's a type of study. They'd found the prime objectives, listed them out, and then they sent that to a group of PPI, patient and public involvement people, and said, okay, can you rank these for us? Which is the most important, which isn't? And their rankings, perhaps unsurprisingly, came out very, very different to how the researchers had said, this is our primary, this is our secondary, we're looking at this, but it's not quite as important. And the conclusion to that paper was, we're often asking the wrong questions. And I thought, well, okay, that's really interesting. To me, that was okay, we can do something with this. I'd like to take that a bit further. And that developed into, there was a funding call from ULAR saying, okay, this is about research methods. How can you improve our research methods? I thought, well, okay, we can do something around this in rheumatology research. And are we asking the right questions? That's how it started out. And then I was very lucky that one of the ULAR Parry group, Martin DeWitt, got involved. He's one of our co-investigators. He's absolutely.
And just for anyone, sorry for it isn't familiar with that, that's the young people with sort of arthritis, isn't it? Off the top of my head,
I think Parry is just generally the public
just in general people with.
Yeah.
Sorry, and, my fault. Yeah.
So we actually had Martin involved from the beginning, and he was absolutely superb. And he was like, yeah, it's a good research question, but we can modify this. What I want to know is, because rheumatology research, it was kind of an early adopter of PPI. They said, Martin was saying, okay, well, we already have PRPs. We already maybe are asking the right questions. What we should really look at is how people are being sort of involved in research. I want to know actually more about their day-to-day roles. And it's like, okay, yeah, no, we can definitely do something with this. And we said, okay, what we'll do is we'll co-design a questionnaire and a set of interviews. How that came about was, okay, I don't know anything about co-design. I'll look that up. And it turns out co-design, as it's not a complex term. It means you design things together. But being a scientist, being a researcher, I was like, well, okay, there must be a tick box list that I can go and do. If you are doing this, you are doing co-design. And again, unsurprisingly, there isn't. That's surprising from a research perspective, because usually you want to tick boxes. But yeah. It turns out that in the literature, in other scientific studies, when you do co-design, a lot of people use it in different ways. But the crux of it, and there was a paper by someone called Sarah Knowles, and she's absolutely phenomenal. It's a great paper. It's about a set of ethics. I think the paper's called More Than a Method, and it really is. Doing true co-design is more than a method. It's about how you treat people and whether you do things authentically or inauthentically. So I could do a checklist and say, this is co-design, A, B, C, D. But it doesn't mean I've actually listened to anybody. So, and I think that was again, part of the crux and the genesis of this study. So what we did then was, okay, we got the grant, and we decided to get together a working group of people with rheumatological conditions and researchers and co-design a questionnaire and a set of interviews. And that was across Europe. So we got 5 people with conditions, 5 other researchers, and got everyone into a room remotely and said, what should we put in this questionnaire? It was really sort of that simple. And that went back and forth. We had a great time doing it. I think we had 4 2-hour workshops and a lot of communication in between by people saying, this is important, that's important, include this, don't include that. I think we came up with quite a good questionnaire in the end to say, okay, you're a patient research partner. How do you think your role's going? What have you enjoyed? Do you think you're being taken seriously? Were you involved early enough? Things like that. Were you paid for your role? And then
Yeah.
asking the same type of questions to researchers. And we hope to compare those two at the end, which should be quite interesting, I hope.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point in there, because as somebody that's been involved in some of that on the other side, like the amount of times where it's like, this is what our doctor told us that is important to the patient, and then I feel really bad. I'm answering it completely oppositely, and then somewhere you find sort of a happy medium in the middle. So it's really important to get those. Are you actually asking the right questions? Because you can get all the data and results in the world, can't you? But if you're not asking the right questions or aiming them at the right people, then it's kind of a pointless process, isn't it?
Very much so, yeah. And it was a learning experience for me because I'd had some patient involvement in my research up to now, but it was really exploding that outwards. And I remember advertising for the working group saying, if you're a patient research partner with experience, or if you are a researcher with experience of patient or working with patient research partners, please email this address. I remember sifting the emails and thinking, as a sort of study lead, I should stand down because everybody had more experience than me. It was really, really, really engaged people. And yeah, it's about asking the right questions, and those right questions were determined by that working group. So it was really a really interesting process.
Yeah, and as someone, I appreciate this might not make a lot of sense to people outside of the UK watching this, because we have a lot of people in the US watching. But there's the NHS peer leadership program now, which I've done, which is amazing. It's sort of like talking about patient involvement and that sort of thing, and that really got me thinking in a different way in terms of like being equal partners in those conversations and that work as well. Because up until to a point, I probably sort of changed my approach and got a little bit more firmer with what I would get involved in and wouldn't get involved in a year or two ago. But up until that point, it was great to be involved, but you never really felt like the things were weighted, in a correct way, or if it went to a vote, or I'm talking about focus groups, everything a lot broader than just what you're doing with that study. So that having that parity and that sort of being treated as a peer, and that is really important as well, isn't it?
Very much so. And I think that's part of the evolution of the whole process, because I think if you went back 10 years, maybe even 5, that was certainly the case. So we'll involve people with the condition, we'll listen, but we might not really change anything. And that's just not acceptable now. That's not how we'd aim to do things, because, as you said, you'd hopefully be involved in the research as a peer. And that means that sometimes you have to be flexible in that, okay, if everyone else wants that, okay, let's do that. Sometimes that's the case. But as you said, being a peer is really, really important, because then it's about mutual respect, isn't it? My view holds as much weight as anybody else's, and therefore I'm going to be listened to. So even if, say, my question doesn't go in the questionnaire in the end, I know I've still been listened to, even though that one thing hasn't happened.
Yeah, they're brilliant. And I feel like I should also, because many of the people that watch the show or listen to this back on the podcast are sort of patients or engaged people. And there is a really good course, which I'm in the middle of. I'm quite early on. I'm a little bit behind. Don't tell EULA this. But there's a EULA course that is aimed at patient involvement in research specifically. It does cost a little bit of money, but I would highly recommend it. Or if you can work with a patient organisation or someone to help you maybe get on that, because I've found that really, because research is just an area that I've been involved a lot with, like campaigns and project stuff and industry, but research was an area I felt like I was personally sort of like, it was a bit of a black hole to me, and I could do more. And it's amazing that resource now even exists, because like you say, you go back 5 years ago, that you're not going to find that on EULA's website, are you? So we must be moving in the right direction somewhere along the line.
I think that's an important point too, is that research as well can appear very, very complicated, very, very high level, very inaccessible, but it's not. I joined it, sort of, as I said, as a 36-year-old, thinking, I don't know anything about this. How am I going to do this? All these terms are completely new to me. I don't understand even the way in which my peers were talking. It was quite intimidating's the wrong word because they were all really, really nice, but I felt like I had to be quiet a lot of the time rather than actually say, hang on, that's a bit odd. Can someone
Yeah.
explain that to me? But it is actually, research is in and of itself quite accessible. It's quite simple when you boil it down, and it's getting past all those barriers, past all that language, past the way people speak. Once you boil it down, you can always ask that question: how is this helping? Is this, certainly in medical research anyway, how is this helping? What are we trying to do? Okay, let's come back from that point and then go into some more complex methods, but it is still fundamentally quite simple.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's amazing, and I also think you speak brilliantly on this, so you're clearly carrying a lot more skills than you're sort of giving yourself any credit for in terms of coming into this sort of like on a slightly sort of a different angle, or not straight out of university. So yeah, thank you for all you're doing on this, and I say you being here tonight just demonstrates your interest in involving everybody. So yeah, I really appreciate that. In terms of this study, then, what's the timeline when you expect and to get data together and results and everything else?
It's 1 year, so it's very tight, and that includes say going for the ethics application, that includes getting the working group together, that included co-designing the questionnaire, so that was sort of a lag. The questionnaire is open for responses, but that has to close tomorrow morning. So once we've closed that, I'll spend a little bit of time having a quick look at the results, but then we'll be back to the working group to fully analyze those results and then draw up the interview stages. So I haven't actually looked at the data yet. That will be very, very interesting when I do. So I can't give you any results at this stage.
No, I wasn't expecting that.
It should be done sort of by late summerish. We should have A, looked at the questionnaire results, and then B, done the interviews. So yeah, it's a 1 year study. It's a very quick turnaround. Part of co-design as well is about valuing the journey rather than the end point, which is very tricky for us researchers. That's very hard.
That must go against the grain.
Yeah, very much so. I the numbers, the articles, the conference abstracts, that's what we get assessed for. That's the bit that goes on our CVs usually. But actually, I can genuinely say I've learned so much, and thank you to the working group in iPREPARE for that, because it's really just been a massive educational thing for me, and we made a good questionnaire. I am proud of it. We all should be.
Yeah, superb. And yeah, I have shared, I will just do it again on screen, but in the YouTube chat for anybody that's watching this live or watching the video back, there is a link there to the study for anybody that wants to know more. And yeah, please do feel free to reach out if you want to come back and share that with us, when that's all published.
That would be great. Yes,
yeah, that'd be amazing.
I'd love to do that.
Because it's always good to sort of, we don't always get to hear the end goal with some of these things. So yeah, it'd be great. And this is why you're a perfect guest for our show, because we've talked about patient involvement, which is something I bang on about every week. So it's nice for somebody to do it in a different voice from a different perspective. But also your other study is a subject that's quite close to my heart as well. So if would you mind sharing a little bit about the QUICK study as well?
Well, yeah, the QUICK is a wonderful study. The QUICK is a study that I was kind of parachuted in on. I joined the University of Aberdeen after working at the University of Southampton for a while. I did my PhD at the University of Southampton. That was where I met Professor Karen Walker-Bone, who I told you about earlier, who's absolutely great. And then at the University of Southampton, there's a group called the Centre for Musculoskeletal Health and Work. That kind of migrated to Aberdeen, and I kind of migrated with it as well. And the Centre for Musculoskeletal Health and Work is includes Yeliz Pryor as well.
Yeah, it's an amazing team you've got.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that connection as well. And I think I saw her last week as well. We were on literally talking. I
saw you
together.
on the same sort of stage. I feel like if there's anyone else at your institution or that team that I haven't now covered or offered an interview opportunity, I feel like I need to do it for fairness.
Yeah, definitely so. But yeah, and so the Centre for Musculoskeletal Health and Work, it's actually something I feel quite strongly on. I really genuinely have an interest in sort of workers' health, workers' rights. So that clicked with me as a sort of topic area. And the QUICK study is a study, it's quantifying the impact of chronic pain on work. Now, that's an interesting title in itself, but what we thought when we first started out with that was, okay, chronic pain clearly affects work. We know that. But actually, we think when people gather information in questionnaires, which is kind of the main way that data is gathered in a lot of these sort of mixed methods research, you'll be sent a questionnaire saying answer this, answer that. And we thought that actually those questionnaires aren't doing a very good job of capturing the impact of chronic pain on work. I think we thought we could do better potentially. Started out doing that by doing a literature review, and that was guided by a researcher called Anne Stagg, and it was absolutely fantastic piece of work. It was what we found when we looked at prior studies on chronic pain and work. We found mainly quantitative papers, so that's mainly number-based papers, but things about questionnaires asking a mass amount of people, and how they reduce chronic pain and work down was usually something in and around productivity. How much productivity did you lose? How many days off did you lose? How many times did you display presenteeism? And when we looked at that, it just suddenly clicked. It's like, okay, yeah, that's really negative. That really is A, very, very negative. And B, it's just one dimensional. It's just saying over and over again, chronic pain at work is a cost to the employer. That's how it was coming across.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, this is going back to what we were saying earlier. If these studies had PPI, or PPI was stronger, you'd get a more multi-dimensional study. Of course, I mean, chronic pain at work, sometimes, yes, it may lead to a slight productivity loss. No, I don't think that's sort of controversial in itself, but that's not all it is. That's just missing everything.
Focusing just on that bit is the problem, not the fact that that's an element of it.
and then it also had qualitative papers. These are papers based on interviews or focus groups. This is things that people say. So when you start talking to people about chronic pain at work, it was clear that there were many, many more things, but that wasn't represented well in questionnaires. We're still trying to design, and this is what Quick is doing, we're trying to design a new questionnaire tool that captures the impact of chronic pain on work. That's what we're doing. So it's kind of bringing these qualitative ideas, these things that people talk about, into a questionnaire where we know that everything's quite one-dimensional. So, okay, that was the literature review. What we did after that was we had a lot of focus groups. We had over 50 people. No, I think it was 50, bang on actually, 50 people in focus groups. People with chronic pain at work, people with chronic pain who had left work, and other collaborators. These were employers or policymakers or researchers into chronic pain, and had focus groups with 50 people and said, okay, this is what we found in the literature review. We made a lot of mini videos. Can you tell us a bit about your experiences? And unsurprisingly, you'll be shocked to hear it wasn't all about productivity loss. There was an awful lot of other things going on that it was clear that we just hadn't asked about before. And again, that made the opportunity very clear that, okay, there's a lot more we can ask about. How do we go about doing that? And we designed a questionnaire based on those focus group responses. So Quick wasn't a sort of co-design method. That it wasn't that completely. But people with chronic pain have been involved in so much of Quick that actually I feel it really does represent the views of people with chronic pain at work quite well. So what we did was we took those focus groups, 50 people, and we boiled it down to, okay, what's the essential themes in here? What are people talking about? And we boiled a draft down to, I think it was about 15 questions in the end. This is what's important to people. And it, as I said, it wasn't productivity loss. And the other thing that people really didn't like was being reduced to numbers. So rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. How does it affect your work? 7. And people were literally saying that in focus groups. I think sort of like, some days I'm a 9, some days I'm a 2. Doesn't mean I'm ever a 6, that kind of thing. And it's like, okay, so we can't make this all about numbers either. Got a draft of a questionnaire together. And it's like, okay, fine and dandy. How are we going to test that? Well, we needed to refine it. So we did what was called a Delphi study. What that involved was, again, more focus groups with people who have pain at work and saying, what do you think of this? Have we got the right things in here? That was followed by a questionnaire saying, Do you think we've got the right things in it? Can you tell us whether we've hit this? Is it relevant to your experiences? And this was actually quite nerve-wracking at the time, because people could vote them out. If they didn't like the question, that could be gone. I mean, you shouldn't get too attached to your work, but really, yeah, it felt quite nerve-wracking and sort of, oh, yeah, and people don't like that question. That could be, yeah, I've spent a long time on that. Luckily, they all passed those thresholds. We made a few changes. We reduced it to 14 questions by merging a couple. Again, it's unsurprising, because we designed the questions based on what people had told us. And the same people, well, it was a different set of people, but again, people with pain at work were saying, okay, yeah, no, that is relevant. That is, you're along the right lines there. So that was a real relief. And now we're into sort of formal testing. We have a draft of 14 questions, and we've sent that out to people with pain at work on a sort of bigger scale. We have about 800 responses now of people actually just filling in the questionnaire as we have it. And hopefully we'll be able from that to refine it a bit further, and then produce a new questionnaire tool that actually captures what people with chronic pain say their pain affects their work in some way. Now, I can actually tell you a couple of the things we put in there, and let's see if it kind of resonates. One thing that people said a lot was that their pain fluctuated. And when trying to manage work, that made managing work sort of trickier, because you don't know on one day whether it be a good day or a bad day. Good day, bad day. That kept coming up in the focus group. So we thought, okay, let's put that into the questionnaire. Those exact terms: good day, bad day, fluctuating pain. So I have a good day, I have a bad day. So, and the bad day comes back to that sort of productivity thing again. Like, if you have a bad day, where your pain was worse, did this affect your work, is essentially what it's asking. Well, yes, that's what we know other questionnaires have done, and they've done that a lot. But then what people also told us was, when I have a good day, well, I work a lot harder. I make up for that quite regularly. So overall, I'm not less productive. I'm definitely not less productive. If anything, it makes me work harder and longer hours. And it's like, again, suddenly that clicked, and it's in the same question now. So yeah, there is an opportunity to say, I had a bad day, it affected my work. There's also straight under it an opportunity to say, I had lots of good days, or a good day when I made up for it.
Yeah, and that's really important, because we'll have like our pain management. We'll be talking about how you've got to pace and you've got to do that and do this and do that. But if you live with chronic pain, such as you're well aware that you don't know when that next bad day is coming. So the tendency to overdo it on the good days, because you don't know what tomorrow looks like. So that's a really important point. So,
Which brings in another of the questions, actually. We haven't quite formulated what the topic or the theme is called. I call it recharging. I don't think it's the best description. But what a lot of people with chronic pain at work were telling us was, I'm fine 9 to 5. You wouldn't know I have chronic pain because I work through it. Where this affects me is that when I get home, I can't eat, I can't sleep properly. All I have to do is recover, because I know that to pay my mortgage, I need to be at work at 9 the next day. And it's like, again, that's really important, because you might not be seeing that at work. An employer might not be seeing that. That's not a productivity loss. That's nothing about your productivity. You are going all out to make sure you perform at work. But actually, that's having a huge impact outside. Going to work is your whole life. That's what people were telling us. Sometimes this happens. So we've got another question about impacts outside of work. So it's like, okay, does it ever stop you seeing friends? Does it affect your family life? Those kind of things are in there as well. And that proved one of the most popular questions, actually, because it's called the impact of chronic pain on work. You could argue that that's not part of work. I would argue quite the opposite, because I've spoken to quite a few people with chronic pain at work, and they said this is the most important. That time and time again, this keeps happening. So I thought that was that was important. That's in there as well.
Yeah, I call it survival mode, and that is just, everyone's got different words for it, but it is that terms of like you prioritize work, and then it's all the other areas that you suffer, and then by nature it makes you miserable because you've got no life outside of work because you're spending all that time trying to manage a condition to prioritize this one activity in your life, you know.
And as far as I know, people really haven't asked that up to now. And as you were saying there, I could imagine that would have lots of other implications leading up from that. Maybe that's linked to loneliness. Maybe that's linked to mental health and depression.
Yeah,
we don't know because no one's really asked that yet. So that, to me, that question in Quick is almost a precursor into a lot of other things. If people come back to us and say, "Yep, this is true, this is true, this is true,"
yeah, you
I don't
open
think
up
that's
a
been
whole
measured before, and that's how research works. Is that suddenly
Yeah.
you see this niche, but of course we didn't really see that niche. That niche came to us in the focus groups from the people who have chronic pain at work. So although that wasn't a PPI exercise, that was still including people with pain in our work, and that's why it was absolutely fundamental, because I think that the questionnaire tool we've designed is much better than anything that's come before. You know, you may have noticed I'm not the most confident person a lot of the time. I am confident in that
That's
questionnaire.
definitely not coming across, Martin, at all. You're speaking brilliantly. This is amazing. But like, I think what was really important is how you've explained that journey with it, you know, because some people will see, and I've had it before, where I get a little bit like questionnaire fatigue or whatever, especially if you start seeing numbers or a score out of 10, because people like me, I've lived with a condition involving pain most of my life. I'm just bored of somebody asking me how much does it hurt and where, because that's not what matters to me. What matters to me is, can I do what I want to do with my son, and can I provide for my family, and can I do my hobbies and have a day where I'm not, you know, struggling with mental health as a comorbidity in my condition that nobody's asking about. So I think explaining how you arrive to those questions is so important, and I really hope we can reach people, if I can just clip that bit and get it out there, to know that, you know, there is that patient involvement, there's the focus groups, there's the questionnaire, then another focus group, then another round of, you know, to get to that point, because I think just so many of us had those bad experiences, and work's the same. You know, you go to work and they'll ask you about what's keeping you off, and sometimes I'll do it. I'll just say, "Oh, it's pain." I don't explain to them that I haven't slept in 2 days, and that's then brought on depression or negative thoughts or worse, or, you know, the fact that I couldn't do the things I promised my son all weekend, and then that sent me down a dark path, and I didn't sleep. Therefore, I can't. Sometimes it is just, you know, we don't help ourselves when we just say, "Oh, it's just pain," because people don't understand that. They don't understand how those elements of the ripple effects of chronic pain impact your work and productivity and absenteeism and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think it's really important, this one, and you are, like I say, perfect guest and the perfect 2 studies. So thank you for sharing.
Again, it's worth looking at for you or any of your viewers, listeners. What's that?
That'll be both, yeah. Both other people consuming this in various forms.
Again,
yeah.
The information about Quick is up on the University of Aberdeen website. It really is worth a look. We're very grateful to both. We have a study PPI group. We're grateful to the participants there, and everybody who's participated in Quick, whether it be a focus group or through the Delphi exercise or even answering the questionnaire. It's again been a journey. It really has. From, okay, we spotted perhaps a niche, what does everyone else think? Oh, okay, yeah, now we can start building something. And although, again, we're very proud of that questionnaire, it really does come from patients every time. There's not a jot in it that doesn't.
Yeah, no, like I say, just the things you've discussed without me prompting, which I would normally be a recurrent theme on the show, from people sharing their lived experiences, shows that, you know, you can tell when it's a tick box and when it's sort of like genuine involvement, and that comes across loud and clear. And so, what's the timeline for this one?
That's almost finished. It was a sort of 3-year project that should be finished this year and finalised. We designed it primarily as a research tool, so it'll be used in other research studies. But I gave a presentation. It was the Centre for Musculoskeletal Health and Work. It's where Yeliz was sort of 2 speakers after me. That one, and I gave it there, and the sort of engagement from places we weren't sort of expecting. Other stakeholders going, I could use that for this, or, oh, actually I could use that for, people putting their hands up, have you considered using it for this? No, but that's a really good idea. Let's talk about that afterwards. So we're quite excited as to where it may get used in the future. So, and yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think, just to confirm, I don't think there's any numbers in there. I don't think there's any 1 to 10 scales. I think I made sure there wasn't.
Patients would love that. I like to say there is places for it. We know that.
Yeah,
like
of course there is.
That somebody that's been seeing rheumatology, dermatology since I was 10 years old, and the first 2 questions, like 9 times out of 10, is what hurts where. I'm done with it, because maybe when I was 15, that was the thing that bothered me the most. Now it isn't. It's about how it impacts my wife and my son, and you've got a family. You understand that it's that bigger stuff, and like the refusal from both employees and sometimes medical professionals to talk about that other side around mental health. And to me, it's a comorbidity. I didn't have mental health challenges until I got psoriatic disease, and the physical and emotional stuff that comes with that. And people don't ask because they're not equipped to answer. Like, I try hard to educate both patients as well as the medical community in this, and sound like, we achieve nothing by just all shouting at each other. Like, we're all trying to achieve the same thing. People don't have the time. People don't have the tools. So we know why. I know why, previous managers of mine didn't ask me how I was feeling, because they didn't know what to do with the information. And that's the same with some medical professionals. But I think this is where research is really important, because if you can put a big flash and light over those issues, it becomes very hard to then ignore, doesn't it?
Very much so. And I hope that's what Quick and even iPREPARE will actually achieve, is to say, okay, this isn't quite working, or that's a real issue. We need to look at that in a lot more detail, because this is obviously very important to people, and we've not looked at it up to now. How can we make this better? I guess that's the focus of most research. I hope it is anyway. Yeah, and it really comes across, and your passion for it really comes across as well. You certainly wouldn't know that this was like a career change thing. Like, you just seem like the perfect person for it. So thank you for coming on and sharing and reaching out, and both to you and Jaleese for making me aware of the amazing things going on at Aberdeen, because that was just not on my radar at all. So now I'm thinking, right, I need to speak to more people, understand what's going on there. So yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it's a good team. I enjoy working there. We're it's a good place to work. It's fun.
Brilliant. Well, you don't have a choice now. You're coming back to share. I've seen far too many positive comments. We have a very sort of like attentive, considerate audience on this live show, and they get very quiet when we're interviewing. But I've never seen so many positive comments during an interview, not for a long while anyway. So yeah, you must come back and share that. That would be amazing. I'd love to hear about it. And thank you for. This is the stuff that, if I'm just being really selfish here, as a patient, not as like an advocate for others or whatever, as a patient, this is exactly the sort of stuff I want to be talked about. I want to be shining light on, how chronic pain impacts work, and working with that language, because like you say, it's very focused on how it impacts the employer. It should be about how it impacts me and what I want to achieve. And like you say, with the iPREPARE one, that's right up my street. Like I say, as somebody that's done the NHS peer leadership stuff, and he's currently going through the ULAR training program as well. That's just awesome. So is there anywhere where people can find you, or if anyone wanted to ask more questions, they could? I'm
on Twitter. Obviously, if Twitter's not what it was, is it? No. I think I'm at Mark J Stevens on there.
Yeah.
You can also contact me through the University of Aberdeen website.
I think it's probably worth shouting out to those wider organisations as well, and those people that come before you that you've name dropped a few. So thank you so much. I'll be going looking at those papers because it is changing. Just in the short time I've been doing all this, I have so much more hope, and I really hope what you've come on and shared tonight gives others watching this a little bit of hope that things are changing as well. So thank you so much.
No problem. It's an absolute pleasure.